The Young and the Restless Spoilers. Lily had never felt the weight of betrayal crush her so mercilessly until the moment she walked into that room and saw what she was never supposed to see. For weeks, she had sensed something was off with Kane. The man who had once promised her a lifetime of honesty and devotion, the man she had trusted with her entire heart and her family's future, had grown distant, restless, and secretive. She had brushed it off as stress, as business pressures, as the typical storms that every couple must weather, especially after years of navigating the chaos of Genoa City together. But deep down, her instincts had whispered something darker, something she was too afraid to acknowledge, because admitting it would mean opening the door to a truth she wasn't ready to face. That truth revealed itself in the most brutal way possible. Lily had been carrying a secret of her own, one she had been guarding not out of fear, but out of a desire to surprise him, to reignite the spark in their marriage with the kind of news that changes everything. After 2 beautiful children together, life had granted them another miracle. She had gone for her ultrasound that morning, trembling with excitement, clutching the image of the tiny life growing inside her womb. She imagined the look on Kane's face when she handed him the sonogram, the tears that might pool in his eyes, the joy that would replace the exhaustion of their recent struggles. For a brief moment, she believed that destiny was rewarding them, giving them another chance to rebuild what had fractured. That hope carried her into the hotel with a lightness she hadn't felt in months. But the sight that greeted her stole the air from her lungs and shattered that fragile dream into shards of anguish. There they were, Kane and Phyllis, tangled in sheets that didn't belong to them, and a room filled with the stench of betrayal. Phyllis, bold and unapologetic as always, lounged with a smug detachment, as if the destruction of another woman's heart was simply part of the game she had been playing for decades. And Kane, the man who had sworn that Lily was his everything, buried his face in his hands with a look that was less about love and more about panic at being caught. The moment was surreal, a tableau of infidelity that seared itself into Lily's mind. The sonogram she clutched so tightly suddenly felt like a cruel joke, a gift meant for a man who had already discarded her in the most humiliating way possible. She wanted to scream, to throw the picture at him, to demand answers, but words failed her. The silence between them was deafening, filled with unspoken accusations and raw devastation. Kane's remorse came too late, his whispered apologies falling into a void that Lily could no longer fill with forgiveness. She had endured his mistakes before, she had given him chance after chance, believing in the man she thought he could be. But this betrayal, at this moment, when she was carrying his child, was an unforgivable cruelty. The irony cut deeper than any knife. She had come to share joy, only to be met with sorrow that would stain her soul forever. Kane, for his part, crumbled under the weight of his actions. In his heart, he had convinced himself that what he shared with Phyllis wasn't love, wasn't even desire in its purest form. It was distraction, escape, a reckless bid for validation at a time when he felt invisible in his own marriage. Phyllis, ever pragmatic and emotionally detached, had been a willing accomplice, offering companionship without the burden of emotional ties. But the consequence of that liaison, the devastation in Lily's eyes, tore through him like fire. He hadn't just betrayed his wife, he had annihilated the foundation of trust that held their family together. He knew in an instant that no apology, no promise of change, could erase the image Lily now carried of him, a man who valued fleeting temptation over the sacred bond of family. As Lily fled the room, clutching her stomach and her shattered dreams, Kane's mind spiraled. The thought that she was carrying his third child, a child who would one day ask what kind of man their father was, filled him with dread. Could he even call himself a father, when he had so carelessly endangered the stability of the family he already had? The weight of fatherhood, once a source of pride, now felt like a punishment he wasn't worthy of. At his age, with 2 children already depending on him, the arrival of another child should have been a blessing, a sign of hope. But instead, it stood as a reminder of how easily he had jeopardized everything for a moment of weakness. His heart ached with the knowledge that this unborn child might never know the version of him that Lily had once believed in, only the broken man she now despised. Lily, meanwhile, grappled with a storm of emotions. She remembered the nights she had stayed awake, tending to their children, defending Kane's choices when others doubted him, fighting for a marriage that had already endured more scandals than most could survive. She had been his anchor, his partner, the one who believed in his redemption when the world saw only his flaws. And yet, in her moment of greatest vulnerability, when she carried their future within her, he had chosen someone else. The cruelty of it was unbearable, twisting her love into fury and her hope into despair. Every heartbeat of the child inside her became a painful reminder of what should have been a joyous chapter, now poisoned by deceit. The people of Genoa City would eventually learn of the scandal they always did. Whispers of Kane's infidelity, of Phyllis's reckless disregard for boundaries, of Lily's heartbreak, would ripple through the community like wildfire. Everyone would have an opinion, from those who sympathized with Lily's plight to those who scorned her for forgiving too much in the past. But none of their judgments could capture the private torment of a woman betrayed at the very core of her being. She would have to decide whether to shield her children from the fallout or expose Kane for the man he had become. And in that decision lay the future of not only her marriage but her very identity. Kane faced his own reckoning. He had choices to make: to fight for Lily with every ounce of sincerity left in him, or to surrender to the reality that he had destroyed what could never be rebuilt. He thought of his children, of the son and daughter who looked at him with innocence, unaware of the monster their mother had seen in him. Would the new baby, if Lily allowed him to be part of its life, ever know him as a father worth respecting? Or would he forever be defined by this one catastrophic moment of betrayal? The guilt consumed him, leaving him haunted by the possibility that he had not only lost his wife but condemned his children to grow up in a fractured home. Phyllis, ever resilient, brushed off the fallout with her usual bravado, but even she couldn't ignore the firestorm she had ignited. For her, it was another notch in a long history of chaos, another chapter in her complicated narrative. But for Lily and Kane, it was the end of innocence, the death of trust, and the beginning of a painful journey that neither of them had anticipated. The question that loomed over them was not just whether their marriage could survive, but whether the love that once defined them could ever be reborn from the ashes of such betrayal. And so, in the quiet aftermath, Lily stood alone with the sonogram in her hands, staring at the faint outline of the child who would soon change everything. Her heart ached with a paradox of emotions: love for the life growing inside her, rage for the man who had failed her, sorrow for the family she thought she had, and fear for the uncertain future ahead. She knew she would have to be strong, not just for herself, but for her children. Whether Kane was by her side or not, she would carry this child into the world, determined to protect it from the shadows of its father's mistakes. Kane had made his choices, and now she would make hers. The days ahead would be filled with tears, confrontations, and impossible decisions, but one truth remained unshakable: Lily would not let betrayal define her, even as it reshaped her life forever. Lily's soul was torn in ways she had never thought possible. The betrayal itself was crushing, but what made it unbearable was the timing, the cruel irony that, as she carried within her the symbol of renewal, Kane had chosen to shatter their union with an act that stripped away every shred of trust. Standing before him, sonogram still trembling in her hand, she felt not only the collapse of her marriage but the collapse of her own sense of self. For years, she had defined herself as a woman who loved with every ounce of her being, who stood firm in loyalty, who believed that devotion could weather storms. But loyalty had brought her here, left her bleeding while Kane's weakness played out on stained hotel sheets. That was when something hardened within her. She whispered words that chilled Kane to his core: that she could not and would not raise this child in the shadow of his betrayal. That she would rather end the pregnancy than bind herself forever to a man who had proven so undeserving. It was not an idle threat, but the raw scream of a woman whose pain demanded to reclaim control over her destiny. Lily had always been known for the depth of her love. When she loved, she did so without reservations, offering every part of herself to the man she believed in. That passion, however, came with a cost. She could forgive mistakes born of ignorance or even the battles of circumstance, but betrayal was a poison that she could never swallow. To betray Lily was to obliterate the very foundation on which she built her life. This was the essence of her nature: wholehearted devotion and zero tolerance for deceit. Once that line was crossed, the warmth of her love transformed into fire that consumed everything in its path. Standing across from Kane now, she felt that fire burning so fiercely that it frightened even her. Kane, in his panic, begged her to reconsider. He clutched at her hands, tried to close the distance, his voice trembling as he admitted to his mistakes, as he confessed that he had lost sight of everything that mattered. But even in his pleas, there was a hollowness. He admitted he had not been prepared for another child, that the thought of expanding their family terrified him, that instead of seeing it as a blessing, he saw it as a burden that complicated the future he thought he wanted. His words, intended as honesty, landed like knives in Lily's heart. To her, the child was not a burden but a miracle, a symbol of love, a new chapter. To him, it was a shackle. At that moment, she realized the divide between them was not just about betrayal but about values, about love itself. Rage coursed through her veins, mingled with heartbreak, until she could no longer contain it. With a surge of fury, she struck him across the face, the crack of her palm echoing through the room like a verdict. The slap was not just punishment, it was declaration. It told Cain that the line had been crossed forever, that she could never return to the woman who once looked at him with trust and tenderness. Tears blurred her vision, but her voice was steady as she spat out the words that sealed their fate. There would be no forgiveness, no reconciliation, no second chances. He had not only betrayed her, he had betrayed their children, their family, and the unborn life she carried. Without waiting for his reply, Lily turned and walked out, her footsteps heavy but resolute. The sonogram, once meant as a gift of joy, slipped from her grasp and fluttered to the floor, lying between them like a ghost of the life they might have had. Cain sank to his knees, clutching his face where her hand had landed, but the real pain came from the hollow emptiness spreading through his chest. He had begged, he had confessed, but even as he did, he knew she was right. He had ruined everything. The woman who had loved him so fiercely was gone, and in her place stood someone who would never again see him as a partner, a lover, or a man worthy of her faith. For Lily, leaving that room was not just an escape but a rebirth. She carried devastation within her, but she also carried clarity. She would not be defined by Cain's mistakes. She would face the impossible decision of what to do about her pregnancy, but she would make that choice on her own terms, not out of fear or obligation. The slap had been her first act of liberation, the severing of chains she had worn for too long. In her heart, she knew there was no turning back. Cain had begged, but his remorse came too late. The woman he had taken for granted was gone, and the future he had squandered was now hers alone to decide.